Imagine if you could buy a house using garlic. Well, in China, that was recently possible. China's real estate market is in chaos right now, where a real estate bubble is threatening to collapse the nation. And mostly it's the fault of property developers who took advantage of millions of Chinese using shady tactics involving garlic, pigs, and watermelons. Now developers are going broke, unable to finish construction, leaving thousands stranded with nowhere to live. And so far, President Xi's government hasn't really helped much, causing protests to erupt across the country, with thousands refusing to pay their mortgages. Very soon, this chaos could possibly spill out of China's borders and come to hit us all here at home. 2 weeks ago, I spoke about China's banking crisis and how it's threatening to collapse the entire country's economy. And the banking crisis is only half of the story. The other half has everything to do with real estate. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, some YouTubers are reporting that the CCP might be using bots in order to leave negative comments and mass dislikes on videos speaking about these types of topics happening in China, possibly so that the Chinese government can control the narrative and stop news like this from spreading. So to counteract that, if you could leave a quick like before we move on. With that being said, here is a brief outline as to what led to China's real estate crisis happening in the first place. In China, family lineage is considered sacred. Many parts of the country practice ancestor veneration, which is the ritual celebration of one's ancestors. But equally important is a person respecting their descendants. Financially, this means Chinese people put a heavy focus on generational wealth. They prefer to invest in assets that will preserve a family's financial value to make it easier to pass on to children. And there's no better way to achieve this than passing on real estate. This means Chinese families aren't very diversified, with over 70% of their wealth lying in real estate alone. But here's another reason real estate is in such high demand. Over the past couple of decades, millions in China have taken part in a mass migration to cities. In the early 1980s, less than 20% of China's population lived in urban areas, but today it's more than 2/3. This has driven a massive demand for new apartment buildings, and is partly why China uses 60% of the world's entire supply of cement. Basically, in China, real estate is king, and considering the size of the population, it is no surprise that China's real estate market is the biggest on earth. But that also means that there's a lot of competition between the property developers in the country, and in an effort to sell more apartments, China's developers have been getting very, very weird. Developers in China commonly offer gifts to attract new buyers, throwing in parking spaces or even free cars to sweeten the deal. One developer even gave a $45,000 Mercedes-Benz to people who purchased a condo from them, and another offering a free 100-kilogram pig to buyers in Jiangsu province. Some developers went even further to attract new business. In a region known for garlic production, one accepted garlic as a down payment on new apartments, a tactic designed to attract the region's garlic farmers to invest in new real estate. This trend was echoed in other farming regions, with watermelons, wheat, and barley also accepted as deposits from farmers. Long story short, the developers were doing whatever they could in order to keep the flow of money entering the property market. And as you can expect, they got greedy really fast and started implementing even shadier tactics in order to increase their revenues. In many nations, buying homes off plan is a common practice, where an apartment can be secured before it's built, usually by only providing a deposit. But Chinese developers took this one step further, preying on buyers during the real estate hype. Pre-sale deals were offered on new apartments that buyers could get with a standard 30% deposit. But there was one big, ugly catch. In most of the world, someone buying off plan doesn't have to start paying a mortgage until the property is delivered. But this isn't the case in China, where buyers had to start paying the mortgage immediately, sometimes forking out mortgage repayments for years while they waited for the property to be built. But despite the risk, this tactic was extremely successful for developers, who by 2020 were generating more than a third of their total income through these pre-sales. So, billions of dollars flowing to property developers who haven't built anything yet. What could possibly go wrong? Well, almost everything actually. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but first I just quickly want to mention that we have a newsletter of 70,000 people plus who are receiving extra financial nuggets written in beautifully written stories. So if you'd like to find out more, there's a link in the description. Okay, so here is where everything starts to go wrong with China's real estate market, and it has everything to do with the developers biting off more than they can chew. After the global health crisis in 2020, China's economy began to slow, meaning fewer people could afford to buy new properties. This slowed the flow of money to developers, developers who now found it hard to pay for building projects they already sold to customers years before. And as they were already heavily indebted, many developers couldn't borrow more money, especially since the Chinese government implemented more restrictions on how much debt developers could have. But instead of admitting they couldn't afford to build projects they already sold, developers instead concealed the truth and created a modern-day real estate Ponzi scheme so they could keep selling homes. They sold thousands more apartments to new buyers and used the revenue to construct building projects they previously sold, which meant that they had to sell even more properties to be able to afford to build the apartments they just sold. This spiraled out of control, with developers needing to constantly sell more to cover previous shortfalls. But eventually, the China's slowing economy meant they ran out of new buyers, and the entire house of cards quickly came crashing down. And just like with any Ponzi scheme, there's always someone that's left at the end holding the bag. And in this case, it was hundreds of thousands of Chinese real estate buyers. All around the country, building sites ground to a halt as developers ran out of money. Evergrande, the nation's biggest developer, is estimated to have several 100,000 unfinished units alone. With building completion deadlines not being met, many Chinese families have now found themselves with nowhere to live. And as reported by the BBC, with no other option, sometimes hundreds of families at a time are moving into unfinished buildings. Anger regarding the situation has spread across China, with mass protests breaking out and tens of thousands of people refusing to pay their mortgages. Attempting to instill confidence in buyers, the CCP has stepped in to offer a solution, pledging almost $150 billion as a bailout fund in case developers begin going bankrupt. However, some in the Chinese government are refusing to help their citizens or to acknowledge the crisis at all. Even worse, some appear to be encouraging it to continue. Only a few days ago, a Chinese state official in Henan province went viral, telling people to continue buying homes, requesting for all comrades to take the lead in buying property, as well as stating, "Buy one property, then buy a second. If you purchased a second one already, then buy a third. Bought a third? Then buy your fourth." Basically, advising people to continue getting into debt to buy more real estate. Real estate that could very possibly never ever get built at all. So it appears as though China's real estate crisis is very far from being over. Now, nobody has a crystal ball, but some are predicting that things could get even worse. And if it does, could it then spill over into the West? Well, unfortunately, the answer is most probably yes. China is the world's second largest economy, meaning whatever happens there is almost certainly going to affect the rest of the world. And as real estate makes up almost a third of China's entire economy, it makes what's happening now an especially serious situation. Real estate prices have already been falling in China for at least 10 consecutive months, meaning developers are still continuing to lose money instead of getting back to growth. This lack of money means Chinese developers have already failed to make payments to foreign creditors, payments that are tied to just about every bank in the West. It's so concerning, the US Fed has already announced this could spill over into our economies, possibly resulting in increased unemployment as Western companies lose revenues resulting from dwindling trade with China. To me, the situation in China is a huge lesson in debt. Regardless whether it's a first-time home buyer or someone investing in their second property or real estate developers building thousands of apartments, most people overestimate how much debt they are going to be able to repay, and then a crisis comes along, possibly the reduction of income or a global health crisis, and all of a sudden this debt can no longer be repaid, possibly causing a lot of individual stress, or in the case of China, an event that could affect billions of people around the world. And this is why I've always been so risk averse when it comes to debt. Most of the time avoiding it altogether, and if I am borrowing a lot less than the bank tells me that I'm able to borrow, because for me, you never know what is around the corner. But anyway, what did you think of this video? I'd love to read your comments down below. And if you did like this video, you might also like the video that we did 2 weeks ago on the banking crisis that is happening in China. There is a link on your screen right now. Make sure you like, subscribe. Also, we have that epic newsletter. Don't forget to check it out, link in the description. And also we have a private membership where people can learn about all things finance and freedom, linked down below. And I will see you in the next one.